Which soybean trait will you use on your farm next year? Well, Darren, all I know is there's no possible way I'm making any recommendation where it's straight Roundups anymore. No more Roundup 2s, and the reason why I say that is there are way too many Roundup resistant weeds. You need another option. So your choices are, should you go Liberty, should you go Extend, or what happens if Enlist gets labeled? I know there won't be a lot of seed, but should you go Enlist? Those are the three things we want to focus on today.
Well, even for the farmers who say, I have zero weed problems, I still don't recommend going straight Roundup Ready soybeans, and the reason why is yield. When you look at the new traits that are coming out, they've been in the breeding process for a long time, and many of the companies have had product ready to come out for several years. We've got the newest genetics coming out of the market in Extend and other traits. Why would you plant old genetics that have been out for a long time? Now, if you look at yield data from this fall, it's going to be really interesting to see once again, just like we saw in 2016, as these new traits take another step up from where the straight Roundup beans were. So if all you're worried about is yield, plant the new traits.
All right, I'm going to assume that you may have heard from around the country, oh, there are all these drift issues and everything else with dicamba. No way. What we're seeing is absolutely not drift. I have been in fields all over the country, and here's what we're seeing. It's volatility. The product lands on the leaf, it vaporizes, and it moves. Okay, what we're usually seeing is this is happening because of temperature inversions. In order to avoid that, just spray during the middle of the day. You really shouldn't have any problem. If you're talking a sunny day and it's the middle of the day, no problem. Finish your spraying 4 hours before sunset, and don't spray at least 2 or 3 hours until after sunrise. You should be in pretty good shape. The other big thing that I'll say, I saw a lot of reports late this summer, guys saying, well, we had delayed volatilization. No, you didn't have delayed volatilization. The volatilization happened within 24 hours of your spray, most likely. But you didn't see the symptoms for 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks, either because you weren't out there scouting every day, or mainly because there was such a low dose of dicamba that volatilized over into your beans. That's why we didn't see any problems show up for a long time. It was such a low rate. And a lot of guys have said, well, it didn't even hurt the weeds or anything else. Obviously, soybeans are the most sensitive plant there is. So if you have a tiny little bit of dicamba that gets on most plants, like a water hemp plant, it's not even going to phase it. But with soybeans, it'll cup the leaves a little bit. If it took 2 or 3 weeks before you saw any symptoms on beans, look, you aren't going to have yield loss. What you're probably going to have is yield gain. There's a 50-50 shot it could be yield loss or yield gain at that point. I'm not too worried about it. We very rarely see any soybean yield hurt unless the beans are shortened by dicamba. There was some of that this year. But certainly after learning from this year, I think a lot of guys are going to get a lot smarter. I'm really not too worried going into next year, as long as you avoid the early morning and the evening spraying.
That said, Brian, there's a huge market shift this year away from straight Roundup beans. Certainly many millions of acres went to Extend, but also there was a huge amount of growth in the Liberty Link acres. And when farmers plant Liberty Link, have no volatility issues, virtually no drift issues, it's pretty hard to argue against a guy that says, man, I got great weed control, I don't have the drift to deal with, I might just switch to Liberty Link. So here's a couple things to think about. When you're going Liberty Link, you can see a substantial improvement in control with Liberty if you use high gallons, high pressure, and small to medium sized droplets. So you have to do all those things right and have good weather conditions. Liberty's going to work great. Where we saw a few issues this year was early in the spring where guys had cool temperatures. Also, where we had wet conditions and guys didn't get a pre-emerge herbicide out, Liberty over the top is great, but you have to start with a good pre or you're setting yourself up for failure. Now, in terms of yield, it's certainly there with the Liberty Link trait. You can look for some trials that are being done this year in your area once again, but you'll see the best Liberty Link beans yielding very similar to the best Roundup Ready to Extend soybeans.
In terms of Enlist, we really like the Enlist trait. The chemistry is amazing. We've used it on our own farm for 3 years in a row. Absolutely no problem with drift. Absolutely no problem with volatility. So we love it. Now, granted, it hasn't been out on a big scale, so it's hard to say how it will turn out when it gets on millions of acres. But the thought of having Enlist as another option is really good. Just keep in mind that dicamba will kill Enlist beans and 2,4-D will kill the dicamba beans. So you can't be rotating back and forth. The number one issue really we saw this year was tank cleanout. You have to have great tank cleanout. And it's the same kind of thing. You start thinking, oh, I can't use that trait. You plant corn and you spray for volunteer corn every year in your soybeans, and you go back and forth at least at some point, right? Well, a volunteer corn killer, if you have even a trace of volunteer corn killer left in your spray tank, that's going to absolutely damage yield. Now, it won't cup the leaves on your corn plant, so you might not see it, but it's real easy to take 10 bushels off your corn, and it may have happened to you before. You might not have even noticed it. All I'm trying to say here is whenever you have products that are going to be sensitive to one crop or the other, you have to make sure you do an amazing job cleaning that spray tank out, and you can. It's not that difficult. Just take the time, get it done right.
Regardless of which of these traits you choose, there's a couple things that I would say are really givens now. If you've got winter annual weed problems, control them in the fall. You'll see much less mare's tail pressure if you get it under control in the fall in many areas of the country. So get out there with your fall treatments, and then don't skip that pre-emerge treatment in the spring too. We're going to need multiple modes of action to do a good job on a broad variety of weeds.
All right, so whatever you pick for next year, our advice is absolutely do not pick straight Roundups. It's time to switch. Either go to Liberty or to Extend or Enlist, assuming that gets approved. Just don't stay with Roundups. There are way too many resistant weeds out there. You need another option for weed control, and you want better yields. The last thing I guess I would say is don't get scared out of thinking, oh, I can't use Extend because everybody's having all these issues. No, we're not having all these issues. We really haven't hurt that many other acres. And once guys figure out how to avoid the temperature inversions and how to spray this stuff correctly, I think everything's going to be just fine.
Your choice of soybean traits may be impacted by our Weed of the Week if it's present in your fields. Can you identify this week's weed?